the sacred warnings of Padre Pio.
You looked forward to it. That is the part nobody talks about. The hope. You told yourself this year would be different. You got dressed, you made the drive, you sat down at the table. And for the first hour, it actually worked. People were talking. Someone laughed. The food was good. You thought, this year is different. Then it happened. The same argument. Not a new one. Not something that erupted from nowhere. The same one. The same person. The same wound opened at exactly the same moment, in exactly the same way. The same silence that followed. The same retreat to separate rooms. The same drive home asking yourself how a family that loves each other can keep doing this. Every year. I want to ask you something. If this were a personality problem, if it were simply about who these people are, their temperament, their history, it would vary. Personalities improvise. Arguments find new subjects. Eruptions surprise you. But yours doesn't vary. It follows a script. Same trigger, same person, same moment, same escalation. That precision is not a coincidence. That is a signature. And what I found in the documented accounts of Padre Pio's confessional ministry, in the pastoral instructions he gave to people who came to him with exactly this story, is going to change how you understand what happens at your family table. I need to say this carefully, because what I am about to describe is not a metaphor. Padre Pio was not speaking figuratively when he described what operates in families that carry unconfessed sin and unhealed bitterness among them. He was describing something he had witnessed, in confession after confession, with a specificity that still unsettles me when I read the accounts. Before I get to that evidence, I want to mention something. I put together a guide on exactly this: how to protect your home and your family from the kind of spiritual intrusion I am going to describe, especially in the days before a gathering. Padre Pio's preparation method. Step by step. The specific prayers. The sequence he actually gave his penitents. It is in the description. But stay with me first, because you need to understand what you are actually dealing with before the method makes the sense it should. The Catholic Church has always taught something that most Catholics have heard without fully absorbing. The family is a domestic church. That phrase sounds like a theological nicety. It is not. In the tradition Padre Pio operated from, the same theology that shaped the great spiritual directors of the 20th century, the family has a corporate spiritual reality. It is not merely a group of individuals related by blood who share holidays. It is an institution with a shared spiritual condition. What one member leaves unconfessed does not remain contained to that person's private life. It becomes a door. St. John Chrysostom, writing in the 4th century, long before any modern framework for spiritual warfare existed, said this: "The home is a little church. When prayer leaves the home, the enemy enters." He was not describing a pious aspiration. He was describing a mechanism. A praying family is a protected institution. A family that has stopped praying together has removed the primary wall. Now here is what Padre Pio understood specifically about the gathering, about Christmas dinner, about Thanksgiving, about the birthday that always somehow goes wrong. When the family gathers together in one physical space, every door that each member has left open through unconfessed sin is simultaneously present in the same room. Think about what that means in practice. The man who has managed his resentment toward his brother for 12 months, kept it private, kept it functional, gone to work and come home and never spoken of it, walks into Thanksgiving dinner. His brother walks in carrying his own unconfessed wound. Their father sits at the head of the table with his. Their mother has been carrying something since 1987. They are all there, in the same room, for the first time since last year. And every open door they each maintain individually is now operating in the same space, at the same time. That is not a horror film premise. That is Padre Pio's diagnosis of what happens in families that have stopped praying together and stopped bringing their wounds to confession. I want to be exact about the evidence here, because I know how this can sound. Multiple accounts from Padre Pio's confessors and biographers document a consistent pattern in his confessional work at San Giovanni Rotondo. When people came to him with stories of family conflict, the same argument every Christmas, the sibling who always found a way to destroy the holiday, the parent whose one comment derailed everything. Padre Pio did not address the surface conflict. He addressed the root. His spiritual directors described what they called his ability to read souls, and what he consistently found was not a personality problem. It was an unconfessed offense, often something the penitent had minimized, sometimes something they had forgotten entirely. A contemptuous word spoken about a family member years ago and never repented of. A refusal to forgive that had calcified so slowly into ordinary resentment that it no longer felt like a sin, just a settled mood, an old bitterness that had never been brought to God because the person did not believe it was serious enough for the confessional. Padre Pio said, "Do not look for the cause of family discord in the personalities of those involved. Look for it in the sin that was never confessed." I taught Catholic theology for 35 years. I never encountered that line in a textbook. It comes from his documented pastoral instructions, compiled from accounts of his confessional work at San Giovanni Rotondo. He was not offering a spiritual observation. He was giving a diagnosis, and the diagnosis came with a particular conviction about what was doing the damage. He wrote, "The source is his collected correspondence with his spiritual children. The family is the most precious treasure God has given to man. When the evil one manages to destroy it from within, the devastation spreads to every soul it contains." When the evil one manages, not when communication breaks down, not when childhood wounds resurface. When the evil one manages. Padre Pio was describing an intelligence directing deliberate action against a specific target. And then there is the account, documented in testimony from witnesses at San Giovanni Rotondo, of the woman who came to him after a Christmas dinner that had collapsed into the same rupture that had been destroying her family's gatherings for 20 years. She was weeping. She described the argument in detail. She named the person who had started it. She explained how everything had unraveled in exactly the same way it always did. Padre Pio did not ask about the argument. He asked one question. When did the forgiveness fail? When did someone in this family decide to carry this wound rather than lay it at the foot of the cross? That is one of the most penetrating things I have encountered in any account of pastoral guidance, because it does not ask who was wrong. It asks when the wound was chosen, and it carries an implication that stops you. If the wound was chosen, if someone decided to carry it, then the pattern has a root, and roots can be addressed, but only if someone finds theirs. Now, Padre Pio gave the diagnosis. Dr. Chad Ripperger has spent decades building the mechanical framework that explains precisely what Padre Pio was witnessing pastorally. Father Chad Ripperger, one of the most experienced exorcists in the English-speaking world, with decades of documented work in deliverance ministry, identifies what he calls familial spirits, demonic influences that operate not on one individual, but on a family system. And their most effective opportunity is when the family gathers. The first mechanic is what Ripperger calls proximity amplification. During ordinary daily life, most people manage their spiritual wounds in some degree of isolation. The man with resentment toward his brother goes to work, comes home, handles his life. The wound is present. The temptation that comes through it is real. But it is an individual temptation. One person's contained battle. When that man walks into the same room as his brother, and his father, and the other members who carry some form of the same unhealed wound or generational pattern, the dynamic changes entirely. What would have been managed as an individual temptation becomes a coordinated event. The spirits operating through each person's unconfessed vulnerabilities can now operate together. The gathering does not create the problem. The gathering activates the coordination that individual separation had been suppressing. The second mechanic is what Ripperger calls the re-enactment mechanism. Family gatherings psychologically restore the original relational conditions in which the wounds were first inflicted. The 45-year-old man who runs a business, who manages difficult people every day, who handles pressure in every other area of his life, walks into his childhood home and within 2 hours is responding emotionally as if he were 15. Not because he is weak, because the gathering has restored the original context. The same house, the same chairs, the same faces across the same table. The nervous system remembers the terrain. The adult daughter who grew up being criticized finds herself bracing for specific words before anyone has spoken. She is not being irrational. The original conditions have been restored, and with them, the original vulnerability. The enemy does not need to create new wounds at the gathering. He simply waits for the restoration of the original conditions and exploits what was never healed. The third mechanic, and this is the one I need you to stay with, is what Ripperger calls legal rights operating collectively. Unconfessed sin, particularly sins against charity within the family. Contempt, unforgiveness, habitual pride directed at a specific family member grants what he calls legal access to the family system. Not metaphorical access, legitimate spiritual access, in the sense that what God has not been given remains available to the enemy. When the family gathers, every member's unconfessed burden is simultaneously present in the same space. The gathering becomes, spiritually, a room full of open doors. And then Ripperger identifies the final mechanic, the one that explains the signature I named at the beginning. In virtually every family presenting with persistent relational breakdown, the explosive moment follows a predictable script. Same subject, same dynamic, same participants, same escalation. The predictability is not coincidence. It is not just how your family is. It is the mark of a spirit that has found a routine that works and has no reason to vary it because the family has never removed the legal right that makes the routine possible. Ripperger adds one more observation that matters here. The more emotionally charged and obligatory the gathering, Christmas, Easter, a funeral, Thanksgiving, the more spiritual leverage is available. High emotional stakes lower psychological defenses. But there is something more specific than that. The hope that accompanies every "this year will be different" is itself the vulnerability. When the gathering fails again, the despair cuts deeper than the original wound. Because it is not only the argument, it is the confirmation that nothing has changed, that it may never change. That specific despair, the one you feel on the drive home, is one of the enemy's most durable tools. Here is what I want you to understand, because this is the center of everything I have been building toward. The gathering is not the problem. The gathering is the test that reveals what has not been healed. And the pattern, the same subject, the same person, the same moment, the same script, will repeat without variation, year after year, until the unconfessed root is brought to God. The enemy has no reason to change a routine that works. I need to tell you about my brother Michael. Every Thanksgiving for more than 30 years, The wound between Michael and our father. I never fully knew all of it. There were things that happened before I was old enough to understand, things that were never spoken about directly. But I felt the presence of that wound every time the family sat down together. There was always a particular conversation that surfaced it, and then a particular silence from Michael, the one that preceded everything else. And then the dispersal. The family scattering to separate rooms. The holiday ending the way it always ended. Our father died with it unresolved. Michael carried it for another 20 years after that. For most of those years, I watched it from a distance, as something that happened to the family, something I was adjacent to but not responsible for. I had a private judgment about Michael's anger. I thought it was excessive. I thought he could not let things go. I never said this aloud. It had been in me so long, it no longer felt like a judgment. It felt like an accurate assessment. In my mid-50s, I attended a retreat where a priest walked us through Padre Pio's teaching on what unconfessed wounds do to a family's spiritual protection. And I went to confession, not because I had done something dramatic, because I understood, for the first time, that the quiet contempt I had held toward Michael for nearly 3 decades was a wound I had been carrying into the room. My own open door, every year, unrecognized as mine. The priest looked at me and said, "That has been in the room with your family every Thanksgiving for 30 years. I wept on the drive home, not because I decided that Michael was blameless. The original wound between him and our father was real and deep and deserved its own healing, but because I finally understood what I had been contributing. The following Thanksgiving, I went to confession in the week before the gathering. I prayed the rosary on Thanksgiving morning. I placed Padre Pio's medal at the center of the table before anyone arrived. I prayed specifically for Michael. Not that he would change, but that whatever wound he carried would find its way to healing. It did not fix Michael. It did not erase the old wound. The familiar shape of the conversation came eventually, as it always had. But something had changed in what I brought into the room. And slowly, over years, not one Thanksgiving, the pattern lost its grip. I do not fully understand the mechanism. I only know what changed, and when it changed, and what I had done differently. So here is what Padre Pio prescribed, not for the sake of understanding what is happening, for the sake of the next gathering, the next holiday, the next reunion, the next dinner that you are already dreading. He never sent a penitent into a spiritually vulnerable situation without armor. He would not let you walk into Christmas dinner unprepared. Everything I am about to describe, the specific examination of conscience before a family gathering, the particular offenses that require naming, the prayers in their exact form, the complete sequence Padre Pio gave his penitents before major family events, I wrote it out step by step in the guide on sealing your home against this kind of attack. It is in the description. Because Padre Pio never sent anyone into a spiritually dangerous situation without a precise method. And for many of us, a family gathering is the most spiritually dangerous situation of the year. The first step is confession in the week before the gathering. Not optional, specifically for the gathering. When you go, confess any resentment, contempt, or unforgiveness you carry toward any family member who will be present. Name the person. Name the offense. Not a general, "I have not always been patient." Be specific. Padre Pio said this single act removes the enemy's primary entry point. Because what God has been given, the enemy cannot use. The open door closes. I spent decades teaching the sacrament of confession as a theological category. I understand it entirely differently now. The second step is a prayer of protection on the morning of the gathering, before anyone arrives. Padre Pio's approach was always to pray over the physical space itself. This prayer takes 60 seconds. Pray it alone, in the kitchen or standing at the threshold of your front door, before the first person arrives. Lord Jesus Christ, I place this gathering under your authority and the protection of your precious blood. I bind every spirit of division, resentment, and pride from entering this space. I loose upon every person who enters this home today your peace, which surpasses all understanding. Blessed Michael, stand guard at this door. Once, slowly, mean every word. The third step is at least 1 decade of the Rosary, prayed before the gathering, offered specifically for the people who will be present, by name. Padre Pio said, "A family that prays together builds a wall the devil cannot pass. A family that has stopped praying has removed the wall and invited the enemy to sit at their table." 1 decade, 4 minutes. He said, "The Rosary prayed for someone before you see them changes what the enemy can do through them." That is not a comfort. That is a claim about how the spiritual mechanics actually work. The fourth step is a specific act of charity directed at the person who most reliably starts the breakdown. You know who it is. Before the gathering, pray for that person, not for your own patience, but for their wound. Lord, bless this person today. Whatever wound they carry that makes them a source of division, heal it. Whatever open door they have, close it. This is not pretending the wound is not real or the pattern is not real. It is a deliberate spiritual act that addresses the root rather than bracing for the symptom. Padre Pio's method was always to pray for the wound that made someone difficult, never to confront the difficulty directly. The fifth step is what Padre Pio called the interior withdrawal. For use in the moment, the gathering begins to collapse into the familiar pattern. You do not leave the room. You do not try to stop what is unfolding. You pray silently in the middle of the escalation. Lord, I remove myself from this. I give this moment to you. I will not add to the wound. Not spoken aloud. Not a physical retreat. A spiritual act performed in the center of the breaking moment that disconnects you from the dynamic without confrontation. Padre Pio taught that the interior act is not smaller than the exterior one. In many ways, it requires more, because it means accepting that you cannot control the outcome, only what you bring to it. I want to close by saying something directly. The next holiday, the next reunion, the next birthday dinner that you are already wondering whether to cancel, it does not have to end the same way. Not because you will find the right words, not because you will finally manage the difficult person effectively, not because the old wound will disappear, but because you can arrive having removed the enemy's access, having closed the doors that were yours to close, having placed what happens in that room under protection before the first car pulls into the driveway. Remember what I said at the beginning. The pattern follows a script. Same subject, same person, same moment, same escalation. Year after year. That precision is a signature. And signatures do not persist because they are inevitable. They persist because no one has removed what gives them access. That is what Padre Pio understood. That is what he told the woman who wept in front of him after 20 years of the same Christmas collapse. That is what he would tell you now. He spent decades in that confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo hearing these stories. Family after family. The same wound, the same gathering, the same moment, the same collapse, and the same prescription every time. Not because he was naive about how deep these wounds go, but because he knew what they go up against when the door is finally closed. The confession in the week before, the morning prayer over the space, the rosary offered by name for the difficult ones, the charity directed at the root, the interior withdrawal when the moment comes. This is the armor he would have given you. Take it with you. God bless you, and stay vigilant.